All right, good morning, students. This is Mr. Rutt. Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to continue with the introduction to the periodic table. Most of this should still be review from last year, but let's just go through it. I know it's probably been a while for some of you. So let's make note of a couple of things here. So first of all matter is composed of elements. We've discovered 118 different elements so far, although we're still discovering new ones. I think they just discovered the number 118 pretty recently in the last few years. The individual unit of an element is an atom, which is what you reviewed yesterday. Here's an example of what an atom sort of looks like, with the protons and neutrons in the center and the electrons going around the outside. This is oxygen. I know that because it has 8 electrons and 8 protons. Here's an example of a bunch of oxygen. And when we say something like, there's oxygen floating in the air, what we really mean is there are a whole bunch of atoms, and way more than this. This is like a tiny number of atoms. There are millions and billions of atoms in just a little piece of air. So the elements that we've discovered so far, all 118 of them, can be put in order based on how many protons and electrons they have. For example, hydrogen is number 1 because it has 1 proton and 1 electron. Oxygen is number 8 because it has 8 protons and 8 electrons, and so on. When we arrange the elements in a particular way, it's called the periodic table of the elements. And here's what it looks like. I'm sure you guys all remember what it looks like. It looks something like this. Now, this is a lot of information crammed into a small space. Let's enlarge it by going over to this website. Okay. Take some time to look around this website. I'm going to show you a couple things you can do here. This is called ptable.com. And it's an interactive periodic table. You can see as I'm hovering the cursor over the elemental symbols, up here is showing you a blown up version of the little box, so you can see it more clearly. So if you want to get a better view of any of these elements, you can just hover your cursor over it. What else? Here's a couple other things you can do. So if you think it's too cluttered up, well, first of all, we can get rid of this add, which is annoying. If you think it's too cluttered up, you can take off the atomic masses up here. Okay, and then you can just look at the symbols and the numbers if you want, as well as the column numbers and the row numbers. You can take off the names but leave the weight. It looks like if you take off, you can't just have the names without the weight. Let me just touch on what I said a moment ago. So the column numbers and the row numbers, we'll talk about this more in a moment, but if I hover my cursor over a number up here at the top, you can see just the elements that are in that group. So in this case, if I'm looking at group number 7, then I'm seeing manganese, technetium, rhenium, and borium. And those are the elements in group number 7 because they're going down from this number 7 at the top. Or if I go over and hover over, say, number 5 on the side, then we're looking at row number 5, and you can see all the elements that are part of row number 5. Also, just out of curiosity, if you want to see what, if you look over here at this temperature slider, you can change the temperature. You can see what state each element is at particular temperatures. So if we go make it really hot, let's make it 6,000 degrees, you can see pretty much everything is a gas. At that temperature, everything that we know of, and some things are unknown because we've never been able to heat them up to that temperature. Whereas if we make everything really cold, pretty much everything is a solid, except once again the unknown ones. And if you go in the middle, you can see when some of the elements start to turn into liquids and gases as you make it hotter. Okay, so back to the presentation. So ptable.com is your best friend forever because it's this interactive periodic table. Groups in the periodic table. So groups are the columns. So I'm highlighting group number 1 right now. These elements all have certain things in common, so we put them in the same group, in the same column, which is also called a group. This is group number 1. Okay, here's another example, group number 7, the one we just looked at. These elements also have certain things in common. We're not going to go through what those things are right now, but just be aware of the fact that elements that are in the same group have some things in common, which is why the periodic table is arranged this way, rather than just being a long list. That's why it's put into this table format, so that we can arrange the elements that have things in common right on top of each other or right beside each other. All elements are organized in groups. Each element is part of one of the 18 groups. These elements at the bottom, they're called the lanthanides and the actinides. Let me just make a note of that. I meant to put the name of them into this video. There's some debate about what group the 2 rows at the bottom belong to. And they're called the lanthanides and the actinides. Okay, periods in the periodic table. So now instead of talking about columns, we're talking about rows. So you look up here, row number 1. Row number 1 might seem kind of weird to you because there's this giant space in between, and there are only 2 elements in row number 1. And there's a very good reason for that that we'll get into later in this unit. But for now, all you need to know is hydrogen and helium have some stuff in common. And that's why they are in the same row. And they have whatever they have in common, they don't have in common with any other elements. And that's why they're the only 2 elements in that row. Rows are also called periods, so this is actually called period number 1. Row number 1, period number 1. Similarly, row number 4, also called period number 4, contains 18 elements, which all have a certain thing in common, which once again we'll talk about later. But for now, you just need to know they have something really important in common. All the elements are organized in periods. Each element is part of one of the 7 periods. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 here on the side. And the rows at the bottom, once again, they're called the lanthanides and the actinides. They're part of rows 6 and 7. You can see this diagram is kind of pointing up here in between barium and hafnium and between radium and rutherfordium. So this top row goes in period number 6, and this bottom row goes in period number 7. Okay, and that's about it. And I just want to go through one example from homework. So for homework, what you have to do is you're going to be given a list of words, just like regular, common, everyday words, and you have to figure out how they are made of elements from the periodic table. So you have to locate the elements, and then you have to list the full name of the element, the atomic number, the group number, and the period number. So for example, if the word was bear, so let's see, boron over here is B, but then there's no element that's just E, and there's no element that's EA, so that's not going to work. So actually what we need to look for is beryllium here, which is BE. So beryllium is BE. So I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write down the full name. It's atomic number 4, which I know because in the top left corner here, that's the atomic number. It's part of group 2, which is the column number at the top, and it is part of row number 2, period number 2, which is over here on the side. Okay, so we've done the BE, so now we need AR. So either it's a single A and a single R, or it's one element that has the symbol AR. And in fact, that's what it is. So if you look, let's see, where is it? Oh, here it is, number 18, argon. So we write down the full name, write down the atomic number, number 18 in the top left corner. This is part of group 18, which you can see at the top, and it is part of period 3, which you can see on the side. And that's the sort of thing that you have to do for your homework.